On March 29, 1890, readers across Britain open their copies of Punch magazine to find a cartoon that will become one of the most famous political images in history. The illustration by John Tenniel shows a ship, its deck rising high above the water. On that deck stands a young man in military uniform, hands clasped behind his back, looking down with an expression somewhere between indifference and satisfaction. Below him, descending a rope ladder toward a waiting pilot boat, is an older, larger figure dressed in the double-breasted coat and cap of a maritime pilot. The descending figure does not look back. He grips the rope with both hands, focused on his careful climb down, leaving behind the ship he has guided for nearly 20 years. The title appears in simple type, "Dropping the Pilot." And the image is immediately understood across Europe. The ship is Germany, the great vessel that has sailed through dangerous waters since its launching in 1871. The young man on deck is Kaiser Wilhelm II, 29 years old, 2 years into his reign, supremely confident in his ability to steer the ship alone. And the pilot descending into obscurity is Otto von Bismarck, 75 years old, architect of German unification, master diplomat who kept Europe at peace for 2 decades, forced to resign just 10 days earlier on March 18th. Tenniel's cartoon captures what words cannot quite express: the casual dismissal of accumulated wisdom, the arrogance of youth, certain it needs no guidance, the terrible risk of navigating without the one man who knows the waters. Within weeks, thus a copy of the cartoon reaches Bismarck at his estate in Friedrichsruh. His reaction, when reported, is characteristic. "Very good," he tells the messenger. "Indeed, very good." His wife Johanna frames the cartoon and hangs it above her bed, where it will remain until her death 4 years later. The image becomes their epitaph, their vindication, their warning to a Germany that chose a different course. But to understand why the pilot was dropped, why one of history's most consequential dismissals occurred, why Europe lost the one man capable of managing the contradictions that kept it from war, one must go back to the beginning, to the delivery room where a prince was born imperfect and the seeds of catastrophe were planted. Berlin, January 27, 1859. Princess Victoria, daughter of Queen Victoria of Britain, a wife of Crown Prince Frederick of Prussia, has been in labor for 13 agonizing hours. The baby is in breech position, a complication that in this era before modern obstetrics threatens both lives. The doctors struggle desperately. Chloroform dulls the pain but cannot ease the danger. The baby is turned forcibly, extracted with hands and instruments that save 2 lives but inflict damage that will echo through generations. The baby breathes. He is alive. Friedrich Wilhelm Victor Albert, known to the family as Willie. Only days later does it become clear that something is terribly wrong with his left arm. The nerve damage is permanent. The arm that should grow strong and straight develops stunted, withered, 6 inches shorter than the right. For a Hohenzollern prince destined to command armies and project military power, so this is devastating. For Victoria, the ambitious crown princess who envisioned her son embodying both Prussian militarism and British liberalism, it is a source of shame barely concealed. What follows is a childhood of well-intentioned torture. The healthy arm is bound, forcing use of the damaged one. A head-stretching apparatus is applied to his neck. The withered arm is regularly inserted into the warm carcass of a freshly slaughtered hare, a bizarre treatment to transfer animal heat into dead nerves. None of it works. The treatments leave psychological scars deeper than the physical ones. Willie becomes hyperactive, difficult, prone to tantrums, desperately hungry for approval. Known at court as Wilhelm the Sudden for unpredictable outbursts, as he is simultaneously fawned over as future emperor and subjected to brutal educational discipline. His tutor works him from 5 in the morning until 8 at night, reporting to everyone, including the child himself, that he lacks the intellectual capacity required of his position. The message Wilhelm absorbs from earliest childhood is clear. He must prove himself. His arm makes him inadequate. He must compensate for physical vulnerability through displays of authority and power. This psychology of overcompensation will shape every significant decision of his reign. His relationship with his parents is catastrophic. His mother Victoria, brilliant and liberal, steeped in British constitutional values, wants a son who will modernize Prussia. She sees Willy's aggressive Prussian military instincts as the enemy of that future. Willy, sensing her disappointment, turns against everything she represents. He idolizes his grandfather, the old Kaiser Wilhelm I, who accepts him as he is. He idolizes the Prussian military tradition that gives him uniform and pageantry and the illusion of commanding power. He learns to carry himself with such imperious authority that most people forget the arm entirely, which is precisely what he intends. Bismarck watches all of this with calculating attention. He cultivates the young prince, feeding his resentment of his parents, encouraging attachment to Prussian conservatism over British liberalism. He supports Wilhelm's marriage to Princess Augusta Victoria over more politically advantageous matches, calculating that a compliant wife will reinforce existing tendencies. He believes, with the arrogance of a man who has outmaneuvered every opponent for 3 decades, that he can manage this young emperor as he managed his grandfather. The old Kaiser was content to reign while Bismarck ruled. Surely the grandson can be kept in similar check. He is catastrophically wrong, and he understands his error almost immediately upon the young emperor's accession, though by then it is too late to correct it. The accession arrives in the strangest circumstances. The year 1888, the Dreikaiserjahr, the year of 3 emperors, is one of the most extraordinary sequences in modern European history. It begins with the death of Wilhelm I on March 9th at age 90. This formidable old man, bedrock of stability upon which Bismarck built everything, dies peacefully, as ending 44 years of rule and a partnership that lasted 28 years. His death leaves a void no one can fill. His successor, Crown Prince Frederick, has waited 27 years for the throne. He is 56, battle-tested in 3 wars, admired as gentle, humane, intelligent. He and Victoria have spent decades dreaming of the liberal Germany they will create, the constitutional reforms they will introduce, the authoritarian excesses they will correct. These are not idle fantasies. Frederick has specific plans, written documents outlining constitutional changes, a vision of Germany fundamentally different from what Bismarck built. But Frederick is already dying when he ascends the throne. Cancer in his larynx, misdiagnosed for a year by a British specialist brought in at Victoria's insistence, and has progressed beyond treatment. He cannot speak. He communicates by writing on scraps of paper with increasingly trembling hand. The vigorous crown prince who led armies to victory is reduced to a man who cannot walk unaided, cannot eat solid food, cannot give voice to thoughts that still organize themselves with painful clarity in his mind. He manages a handful of official acts, then watches helpless as his reign slips away before he can accomplish anything intended. Frederick III dies on June 15, 1888, 99 days after ascending the throne. His final diary entry circulates as epitaph. "What is happening to me? I must get well again. I have so much to do." Among the saddest sentences ever written by a reigning monarch, a man fully conscious of his own unfulfilled potential, watching history escape his grasp. Gladstone calls him the Barbarossa of German liberalism, meaning both the magnificence of the potential and its frustration. The liberal Germany he might have created dies with him at Potsdam Palace. His son inherits the German Empire at age 29, and he moves immediately to make clear he intends to rule differently from either predecessor. Where Wilhelm I let Bismarck manage the state, the new Kaiser wants to be his own master. He wants personal control over foreign policy, military appointments, domestic legislation. He wants, as one contemporary wit puts it, to be the bridegroom at every wedding, the corpse at every funeral. His personality demands center stage at all times, in all situations. Bismarck recognizes the problem within weeks. And the new emperor receives visitors without informing the chancellor. He makes statements on policy without consulting his minister. He interferes in military appointments, insisting on men loyal to himself rather than to the system. He is charming, brilliant in conversation, possesses extraordinary memory, and impressive command of technical details, but his attention span is limited. He pursues enthusiasms intensely, then abandons them for the next obsession. His judgment, untempered by experience or discipline, swings between bold and reckless. He is not stupid, but dangerous in ways stupidity cannot account for. The personality clash alone might have been managed. Bismarck had dealt with difficult personalities before, but personality clash accompanies real disagreements about policy. And it is on these policy disagreements that the relationship finally breaks. In summer 1889, massive strikes sweep through the Ruhr coalfields. Tens of thousands of miners walk out demanding better wages, shorter hours, the right to organize. Bismarck's instinct is confrontation. He wants to provoke workers into violence, justifying military suppression, to use the crisis as excuse to revise the Constitution in authoritarian direction, to create conditions for final decisive showdown with the socialist movement he has been fighting for more than a decade. Wilhelm wants something completely different. He wants to be the workers' emperor. He wants to be loved by laboring classes, seen as a monarch who cares about the poor, to win workers' loyalty through concession, not repression. Without consulting Bismarck, he receives a delegation of striking miners at the Berlin Palace. He promises to look into their grievances. He publicly sides with workers against their employers in terms that horrify conservatives. He issues a royal decree promising social reforms, better working conditions, restrictions on child labor, limits on women's working hours. The decree is published without Bismarck's knowledge or approval. For Bismarck, this is intolerable. The chancellor does not object to the substance of reforms, which are similar to his own social insurance programs. What he objects to is the process. The emperor is governing without him. The constitutional order, which places all executive power in the chancellor's hands, is being bypassed. If Wilhelm can make policy unilaterally, the chancellor is superfluous. Bismarck's entire system of power depends on being the indispensable mediator between emperor and government. If the emperor does not need a mediator, Bismarck has nothing. The confrontation comes to a head in February 1890. Bismarck has been trying to renew the anti-socialist laws, legislation passed in 1878 that banned socialist organizations and publications. The laws are due to expire, and Bismarck wants not merely to renew, but strengthen them, to make them permanent, to finally crush the socialist movement through overwhelming legal force. He plans to deliberately engineer a political crisis in the Reichstag elections, calculating that if the cartel coalition of conservatives and national liberals loses badly, resulting confusion will make him indispensable. But it fails this time. The Reichstag elections of February 1890 are catastrophic for Bismarck. The cartel coalition collapses, falling from 220 seats to 135. The Social Democrats win 1.5 million votes, more than any other party, 20% of the total. Every indicator shows that the anti-socialist laws have failed to reduce socialist support. Far from being indispensable, Bismarck is associated with a discredited policy that the German public has rejected at the ballot box. The crisis he manufactured has weakened him rather than strengthening him because Wilhelm refuses to play the role Bismarck assigned him. The final confrontation comes at the Foreign Office on March 15th. The meeting begins at 9 in the morning and lasts hours. The precise content remains disputed, since both men give different accounts afterward, each painting himself as reasonable and the other as aggressor. What is clear is that the meeting is long, heated, and covers multiple points of disagreement. Wilhelm objects to Bismarck's practice of meeting privately with Reichstag party leaders, particularly the Catholic Center Party's Ludwig Windthorst. The emperor has issued an order requiring all ministers to communicate with him before seeing the chancellor. Bismarck has dusted off an 1852 cabinet order requiring all ministers to report to him rather than directly to the emperor. Wilhelm considers this order obsolete and demands it be rescinded. Bismarck refuses. The argument escalates. Wilhelm produces a document, reportedly from Russian Emperor Alexander III, dismissing the German Kaiser as a badly brought-up young man of bad faith, a comment Bismarck had shown to a Russian diplomat and which had found its way back to Wilhelm. The humiliation of being mocked thus and of knowing Bismarck had shared foreign contempt for him with third parties inflames the emperor. Bismarck, sensing the meeting going badly, plays what he believes is his final card. He tells Wilhelm that he has been negotiating a new cabinet arrangement that would bring in political allies, that he still commands sufficient support to govern. It is a bluff, and Wilhelm calls it. The emperor tells the chancellor his services are no longer required and asks him to submit his resignation. Bismarck returns to the chancellery and sits at his desk for a long time. And he has held this desk for 28 years. He has sat in this chair through the wars of unification, through the founding of the empire, through construction of the alliance system that has kept European peace for 2 decades. The maps on the wall, the documents in the drawers, the accumulated paper and leather and ink of a quarter-century of power surround him. He picks up his pen and writes his letter of resignation. The letter is blistering in its indictment of Wilhelm's interference in foreign and domestic policy, a document so damning that it will not be published in full until after Bismarck's death. On March 18, 1890, the resignation is formally accepted. Bismarck is stripped of most titles and given a new one, Duke of Lauenburg, a consolation honor he accepts with barely concealed contempt. And he is given a pension of 18,000 marks annually. He packs his belongings, says farewells to staff who have served him for decades, and leaves Berlin for the last time. He is 75 years old, and the most powerful man in Europe has just been dismissed like an unsatisfactory servant. And that is when John Tenniel, in his studio in London, picks up his pen and begins to sketch. Tenniel is 69 years old, has been Punch's chief cartoonist for 34 years, has illustrated Alice in Wonderland, and created some of the most memorable political images of the Victorian era. He works entirely from memory and imagination, since losing sight in his right eye decades ago in a fencing accident. The image comes to him complete: the ship, the deck, the young Kaiser looking down, the old pilot descending. But he does not need to label the figures. Everyone will know who they are. The metaphor is perfect, immediately comprehensible across every language and culture. A ship losing its pilot, a vessel setting out into dangerous waters without the one man who knows how to navigate them. The cartoon appears on March 29th, 11 days after Bismarck's resignation. The reaction is immediate and global. In Britain, it is received as cautionary depiction of the perils in jettisoning proven diplomatic expertise. Punch itself conveys foreboding speculation on implications for Germany's steady course. In France, there is Schadenfreude. The architect of their 1871 humiliation has been overthrown. In Austria-Hungary, there is apprehension over prospective fractures in the interlocking pacts Bismarck engineered. The suddenness catches everyone off guard. Within months, Tenniel's image has been copied, adapted, referenced across the world. The phrase "dropping the pilot" enters the English language as an idiom, meaning to dismiss a trusted advisor. In German, it becomes Der Lotse geht von Bord. The pilot leaves the ship. 24 years later, when the First World War breaks out, cartoonists will return to Tenniel's image. Will Dyson publishes Prophecy in October 1914, showing Wilhelm himself descending from the ship, directly echoing Tenniel to imply that the Chancellor's removal prophetically doomed the empire to conflict. Bernard Partridge draws The Haunted Ship in 1915, depicting the ghost of Bismarck returning to haunt a distressed Wilhelm aboard a listing vessel. But in March 1890, none of this is foreseeable. Bismarck departs for Friedrichsruh and begins the strange twilight of his career, 8 years of exile during which he remains more famous, more visited, more influential in German public consciousness than the emperor who dismissed him. Thousands make pilgrimages to shake his hand. When he travels, crowds line the streets. Nearly 500 Bismarck towers are built across Germany, monuments funded by popular subscription. The feud with Berlin grows bitter. Wilhelm instructs Austria's emperor to deny Bismarck an audience in 1892. Bismarck responds with interviews so savage in their criticism of government policy that they amount to an opposition manifesto. In 1896, Bismarck reveals the existence of the reinsurance treaty with Russia to a Hamburg newspaper. And the disclosure causes sensation. Caprivi had promised the Reichstag there were no secret treaties. The revelation gives that denial the lie. Wilhelm is furious. Bismarck has revealed state secrets. There is talk of prosecution, but the former chancellor is too popular, too iconic to be arrested, and he is right about the significance of what he has revealed. Most historians agree the failure to renew the reinsurance treaty marks the decisive turning point in Russia's movement away from Germany and toward France. The chain of causation runs clearly. Without the reinsurance treaty, Russia seeks French alliance. With French alliance secured, Russia feels confident enough to pursue interests in the Balkans more aggressively. The Franco-Russian alliance transforms every Balkan crisis into potential great power confrontation. The immediate consequences of Bismarck's dismissal ripple outward through European diplomacy like shockwaves from an earthquake. His successor, Leo von Caprivi, is a capable military administrator but no diplomat. He listens primarily to Friedrich von Holstein, the brilliant but paranoid political director of the foreign ministry, who has always been uncomfortable with Bismarck's system of overlapping commitments. Holstein argues that the reinsurance treaty with Russia cannot be maintained alongside the dual alliance with Austria-Hungary, that the contradictions will eventually force a choice between the two powers, that a cleaner, more transparent system will serve Germany better. When Russia requests renewal of the reinsurance treaty in June 1890, Germany declines. The refusal is politely worded, emphasizing the desire to maintain friendly relations through personal contact rather than written commitments. Russian Foreign Minister Nikolai Gers is stunned. He warns that Russia will have no choice but to seek other arrangements. The German response is essentially a shrug. Wilhelm believes his personal friendship with Tsar Alexander III makes formal treaties unnecessary. This proves to be one of the most catastrophic miscalculations in modern diplomatic history. France has been waiting for this moment for 2 decades. Since the defeat of 1871, French diplomacy has had one overriding objective: to break out of the isolation that Bismarck imposed on it, to find an ally powerful enough to make Germany think twice before moving against France again. The obvious partner has always been Russia. But as long as Russia had the reinsurance treaty, Russia had no reason to accept French advances. Now that calculation changes overnight. In July 1891, a French naval squadron visits the Russian base at Kronstadt. The reception is extraordinary. Tsar Alexander III, the deeply conservative autocrat who reportedly detests French republicanism, stands bareheaded while the band plays the Marseillaise, the anthem of the revolution that sent his counterpart to the guillotine. The symbolism is unmistakable. Ideology is irrelevant when security interests demand partnership. French capital begins flowing into Russia. Loans totaling hundreds of millions of francs finance Russian railways and military modernization. In August 1891, France and Russia exchanged diplomatic notes, constituting a preliminary consultative pact. In August 1892, the chiefs of the French and Russian general staffs meet and sign a military convention. The nightmare that Bismarck spent his career preventing has been given formal military substance. The convention is ratified in January 1894. The Franco-Russian alliance is born. Wilhelm and his government do not immediately understand what they have done. The alliance is initially seen in Berlin as a minor irritant, rather than a strategic catastrophe. After all, Germany still has the Triple Alliance with Austria-Hungary and Italy. The German army is larger and better trained than the French or Russian armies individually. But the balance of power in Europe has shifted fundamentally. The flexible, asymmetric system that Bismarck maintained, with Germany at the center and France isolated at the periphery, has been replaced by two roughly equal armed camps facing each other across the continent. The years that follow see Germany's international position steadily deteriorate. Wilhelm pursues what he calls Weltpolitik, world policy, demanding that Germany's global presence match its industrial might. He builds a high-seas fleet designed to challenge British naval supremacy, alarming London and pushing Britain toward France. Admiral Alfred von Tirpitz becomes the architect of German naval expansion, constructing battleships whose only purpose is to threaten the Royal Navy. British naval strategists respond with the Dreadnought program, a naval arms race that consumes billions and accomplishes nothing except mutual suspicion. The Moroccan crises demonstrate the new rigidity. In 1905 and again in 1911, Germany attempts to break up the Anglo-French Entente by challenging French influence in Morocco. Both crises backfire spectacularly. Rather than fracturing the Entente, they strengthen it, convincing Britain that Germany is aggressive and unreliable. By 1907, Britain has settled its colonial disputes with Russia as well as with France, and the Triple Entente is complete. Germany, which Bismarck kept as the fulcrum of European diplomacy, has become the isolated power, surrounded by potential enemies, facing the encirclement that Bismarck spent his career preventing. The Schlieffen Plan, Germany's military response to the two-front war Bismarck tried to prevent, calls for rapid knockout blow against France through Belgium before turning east against Russia. The plan requires violating Belgian neutrality, which Britain has guaranteed since 1839. Britain's guarantee becomes the mechanism by which what begins as an Austro-Serbian quarrel in summer 1914 becomes World War. As the 1890s progress, Bismarck's interventions grow less frequent. His wife Johanna dies in November 1894 after 47 years of marriage, and something essential goes out of him with her. He sits in his wheelchair at Friedrichsruhe and watches the Germany he built drift toward confrontations he spent his life preventing. In December 1897, Wilhelm pays a visit. The meeting is awkward, forced, the politeness of two men who despise each other performing reconciliation for political purposes. A photograph shows Bismarck in his wheelchair, massive even in infirmity, face set in cold assessment. Beside him stands the emperor, resplendent in uniform, decorations gleaming, arm carefully positioned to minimize appearance of weakness. The two men look at each other across 20 years of enmity, and the immeasurable distance between what Germany was and what it is becoming. Bismarck dies on July 30th, 1898, in his bed at Friedrichsruhe. He is 83 years old. In final days, delirious with fever, he mumbles and sings quietly to himself. He had insisted on burial not in Berlin, not in the cathedral with the Hohenzollerns who owe him everything, but at Friedrichsruhe on his own land. At the gravestone will be inscribed with words he requested, Ein treuer deutscher Diener Kaiser Wilhelms I, a faithful German servant of Kaiser Wilhelm I. The deliberate slight to Wilhelm II, the insistence on specifying which Kaiser he served, is the last act of an unforgiving man settling accounts from beyond the grave. 16 years later, in August 1914, the ship loses its way completely. The pilot has been gone for 24 years. The men who replaced him lack his understanding of European waters, his knowledge of which currents to ride and which to avoid, his instinct for when to change course and when to hold steady. When crisis comes in Sarajevo, when the Archduke is assassinated and Austria demands satisfaction from Serbia, the mechanisms Bismarck built to manage such crises no longer exist. There is no back channel to Russia, no reassurance that Germany understands Russian interests and will restrain Austria. There is no flexible alliance system allowing Germany to maintain influence in both Vienna and St. Petersburg. There is only the rigid confrontation of armed camps, the Triple Alliance against the Triple Entente, each bound by treaty obligations and mobilization schedules that transform any local crisis into continental war. The ship strikes the rocks. Germany declares war on Russia on August 1st, on France on August 3rd. German armies cross into Belgium on August 4th. Britain declares war to honor its guarantee of Belgian neutrality. Within 6 weeks, Europe is engulfed in a conflict that will kill 17 million people, destroy 4 empires, redraw the map of the continent, and create conditions for an even more terrible war 20 years later. The pilot who might have navigated these waters, who spent his career learning how to manage the contradictions that kept Europe from war, has been gone for a quarter century. The young Kaiser who was so confident he could steer the ship alone discovers too late that piloting requires more than confidence, that the waters are deeper and more dangerous than he imagined, that some knowledge cannot be learned except through decades of experience. In London, in the offices of Punch magazine, someone pulls out the old cartoon from March 1890, dropping the pilot. The image that seemed merely clever at the time now looks prophetic, a warning that was issued but not heeded, a moment when Europe might have chosen differently but did not. Tenniel himself is still alive, 84 years old, retired from cartooning but watching the war with the horror of a man who lived through the entire Victorian era of relative peace and now sees it ending in mechanized slaughter. The cartoon hangs in his studio, a reminder that sometimes the simple images are the truest ones, that the metaphor of the pilot leaving the ship captured something essential about what was lost when Bismarck was dismissed. History offers few perfect images, few moments when art and reality align so precisely that a single drawing can encapsulate an entire era's tragedy. Dropping the pilot is one of those rare moments. It showed what was happening while it was happening. It warned what would follow. And when the warning proved accurate, when the ship did indeed founder without its pilot, the image gained a terrible weight, became not just political commentary, but historical prophecy. The pilot was dropped, the ship sailed on, and everyone who should have known better stood by and watched as it headed straight for the rocks. The story of how the pilot was dropped is the story of how ego triumphed over wisdom, how youth's arrogance dismissed age's experience, how personal resentment destroyed political judgment. It is the story of Wilhelm II, the man with the withered arm and something to prove, who could not tolerate sharing power with the man who built everything he inherited. It is the story of Bismarck, who created a system so dependent on his personal genius that it could not survive his departure. But most of all, it is the story captured in Tenniel's cartoon, that the story of a ship losing its pilot and setting out into waters that will prove far more dangerous than anyone aboard imagined. Europe paid the price for that decision in 17 million lives, and the pilot who could have prevented it, who spent his career learning how to navigate these exact waters, watched from Friedrichsruhe as everything he built drifted toward catastrophe, helpless to prevent what he saw coming with terrible clarity.